Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dive into the invisible web of relationships that, believe it or not, secretly shapes whether a school succeeds or fails.
All right, let's kick things off with a puzzle that has bugged parents, principals, and policymakers for years. You've got two schools. They look identical on paper, same funding, similar students, teachers with the same qualifications. So why does one school knock it out of the park while the other one struggles? What's the hidden variable here? Well, the thing is, the answer isn't something you can find on a spreadsheet or in a curriculum guide. It's hidden in the day-to-day, often unseen interactions between teachers. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain and actually map out a school's hidden operating system.
So, to really get a handle on this, we've got to start by asking the right question.
Way back in 1990, a researcher named Judith Warren Little asked this brilliant question. How much do a teacher's relationships with other teachers really matter? For decades, that was a tough one to answer. But now we actually have the tools to see it for ourselves.
Okay, so how in the world do you make something invisible visible? Well, that brings us to a whole new way of looking at things. It's called a social network perspective. And just to be clear, we're not talking about your Facebook feed here. This is about scientifically mapping out how information and collaboration really flow in an organization. Who talks to whom? Who do people go to for advice? It helps to see how expertise can spread like wildfire or just fizzle out. And what this perspective reveals is a school's social capital. Let's break that down. Think of it like this. What a teacher knows is obviously important, but their access to what all their colleagues know, that's a huge resource. It's capital they can spend every day to solve problems and get better at their jobs. Now, what's really interesting is that this whole idea is built on three really simple but kind of mind-blowing assumptions. First, the good stuff, like a killer lesson plan or advice on a tough kid. It flows through relationships. Second, teachers aren't just isolated individuals, they're totally interdependent. And third, these networks, they can be a huge source of opportunity, but they can also hold an entire school back.
So what happens when you actually map these networks out? Well, the results are pretty wild, and they reveal these 5 key patterns you see in schools just about everywhere.
First off, you realize right away there is no such thing as a typical school network. Not at all. Some schools are these vibrant, buzzing hubs of collaboration, and others, they look more like a bunch of isolated islands.
And I mean, the difference can be massive. One big study found that in the most connected schools, a teacher might talk shop with up to 77% of their colleagues. I mean, can you just imagine the sheer brain power and flow of ideas in a place like that? It's incredible.
But then you look at the other end of the spectrum, and that number just tanks, down to a mere 10%. That's literally the difference between a rich, supportive web and a building full of closed doors.
And even in those really connected schools, it's not like everyone's holding hands in one big circle. Nope. The network is almost always fragmented into these little subgroups. You can think of them as cliques or departments that mostly keep to themselves.
And a big reason for this is something called homophily, which is really just a fancy way of saying that birds of a feather flock together. We tend to connect with people who are like us. And while that can feel efficient, you get a quick answer, right? It also creates these really dangerous silos where great ideas can get trapped. And this brings us to something that is absolutely crucial to understand, the official school hierarchy. The org chart with the principal at the top. It almost never shows how things actually work. See, the person with the official title isn't always the one people actually go to. The official instructional coach might be on the chart, but the real go-to person for advice, it might be that veteran third-grade teacher down the hall who just knows her stuff. The real influencers often don't have a fancy title at all. They just have trust.
All right, so moving on. It's also not just that people talk, but why they talk. It turns out not all connections are created equal.
Researchers basically split these relationships into 2 big buckets. You have instrumental ties, which are all about work, getting advice, sharing materials, and then you have expressive ties, which are about friendship and personal support. You absolutely need both for a healthy school, and knowing the difference tells you a lot. And for our last big finding, it turns out that who a teacher is plays a massive role in where they fit into this web. Research shows again and again that things like your age, your gender, what subject you teach, even just where your classroom is physically located, All of it helps predict who you talk to. Just think about that for a second. A brand new teacher and a 20-year veteran could have classrooms right next to each other, but because of this network effect, they might as well be working in two completely different schools. Okay, so we've laid out this invisible map. We can see the clusters, the key players, the people left out. But the big question is, so what? What do you do with that information? This is where we shift from just seeing the structure to actually using it strategically. This is where all this data becomes a super powerful tool for anyone in a leadership position. Because once you can see the network, you can start to improve it. You can actually start to design for better collaboration instead of just crossing your fingers and hoping it happens. I mean, just imagine you're a principal and you have this map. Suddenly, you can pinpoint the real leaders, not just the ones with titles, to help you champion a new idea. You can see who's out on an island and needs more support. You can figure out how good ideas are actually spreading or where they're getting stuck. You can literally build bridges between those disconnected groups. It's a game changer. Which all leads us to the final and honestly the most important takeaway from all of this. Why does any of this matter? Why should we care so much about these invisible connections? It's because this network, it's not just some nice, fluffy social thing. It is the school's hidden operating system. It's the code running in the background that quietly determines whether innovation takes off or dies, whether teachers feel like they have a lifeline or they're all alone, and at the end of the day, whether the school gets better. It really controls the flow of everything that matters: knowledge, help, and trust. So seeing past that formal org chart isn't just a neat little exercise. It's absolutely essential. And it leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If you mapped out your own school, your own company, who would the real influencers turn out to be?